Hey there, it's William from Boxer2Valve.com. And on the last episode, we took a bunch of parts apart. Now we're down to the next thing, which is going to be the clutch. So let's go ahead and take the clutch out and have a look at the condition and see where we go from there. So first thing I'm going to do is remove the timing plug. And I want to set the engine at top dead center. Which is easy enough to do. You'll want to look for the marks that says OT and have that lined up in the window. OT is top dead center in German. Yeah, setting the engine at OT is just something I like to do because it gives me a good reference point about how everything needs to go back together again, and so that's where we start. Okay, so this clutch is the same type of clutch from basically 81 to the end, and it's different than the earlier clutches. The early clutch, if you looked at our /6 video, required some special tools to disassemble and reassemble. And that's not the case here. It's a bit of an improvement from that standpoint. You don't need any special tools other than the clutch alignment tool, but we'll get into that later. So what I'll do is loosen them all. Of course, I moved away from OT, but that's no big deal. And now you're going to feel a little bit of spring tension. So just loosen each bolt. Basically removed 3 bolts, left 3 bolts in, and now just gonna go around and loosen a little bit at a time on these 3 bolts and sort of back the clutch plate off. And that's pretty much it. It doesn't spring back at you. There's nothing violent that happens at all. It just comes apart. So is the clutch pack, as it were. Just came out of the bike just like this. The diaphragm spring, and then these 2 pressure plates here, and the clutch disc itself. All right, so what do we see here? You know, probably would have gone a long time still. There's quite a bit of meat on the clutch as far as the lining is concerned, but it's really kind of glazed, maybe from a lot of slipping. There's also a lot of heat spots on here. You see all the discoloration. And so it's always a good idea to replace all of the parts, especially if you see a clutch pressure plate like this that has a lot of discoloration. It's kind of uneven. Even if you just put a new disc in there, it's going to accelerate the wear of the clutch. So for best results, it's always best to replace all 4 of these components when you're doing a clutch job. That's what we'll definitely do on this bike. Sometimes you can also get an idea how long ago a clutch has been replaced by the casting marks. Can give you some indication. Looks like this was made in 2014, so it wasn't done all that long ago. Not always the case that you can see those casting marks, but it's an interesting thing to look at. Whenever you have a clutch out is a great time to do a rear main seal. And the next step we have to do here is remove the clutch carrier. There's no real heavy flywheel as in the earlier motorcycles. It's just a stamped piece with the ring gear for the starter drive. And essentially this metal part plus the clutch components themselves really are what make up the rotating mass of the flywheel. That's one major difference between the 81 and later models as compared to the earlier machines. Now before we go ahead and do anything with this, we're going to take the front timing cover off the bike, and I'll show you why. Before removing the flywheel on this or any of the 2-valve twin models, even this /5, 6, 7 series, everything, you need to secure the crankshaft so that it won't be moved forward. with the flywheel installed, the axial movement of the crankshaft is limited by the part being installed. Once that's removed, then the crankshaft can theoretically move forward. And there's these thrust washers. They look like this, and they're just held in place on these two pins, like on the back of the crankshaft. Actually, there's two of them. Now, if the crankshaft moves forward, this has to be basically sandwiched in between the crankshaft and the engine case. If the crankshaft is allowed to move forward, this can fall off the pins and drop down, and then when you go to reassemble, if you don't notice it, you could damage the part. And if you do notice it, there's no way that I think possible to reinstall this part back onto the end of the crankshaft without fully disassembling the engine. So there's a lot of different ways people have done this over the years, but this is the way I do it. It works fast and easy. Remove the front timing cover. And then this is the crankshaft here. So all we're going to do is put a short 6mm socket in there and then run a strap around the frame tubes over the top of it. Great. So now there's quite a lot of tension on that strap, and I'm pretty confident that there's no way that the crankshaft can move forward. So having done that, we can go back and remove the bolts now for the flywheel. One other thing about the clutch is that there are markings on here. You see there's a little bit of white paint on there, right there. And there's a white dot on this part here. And there's a little white stripe on this part here. And so this marks, these are balanced, and this marks the heaviest part. I believe it's the heaviest part. But in any case, you want them spread apart as best as possible, like in thirds, like a Mercedes-Benz star, kind of like that. So when you would go to put this back together again, you would try to have this white part up here and this white part down there, as opposed to that marking on the flywheel. And this is the reason I'm pointing this out now is because if you go and clean a part, make sure that you either remark that paint or make sure that you don't scrub it off of there. It should stay there. Okay, now to remove this flywheel or clutch carrier, I verify that I'm still at OT, just as a reference. This is the tool that's used to hold the flywheel in place, and it's a pretty neat tool. We're actually having some of these manufactured locally, and I believe that by the time this video is done, we may actually have them available. If not, check back, we'll have them in a few weeks, definitely. But this works on both the older and the newer bikes, and it basically just sets in there like this, essentially, and locks the flywheel. You just have to line up the holes. And so, using the original clutch bolts, attach this. And then this will make contact with that part of the casing right there and lock the flywheel. Back up to OT, and now the tool has done its job. It can be removed. And that was the last use of these clutch bolts because they're going to get tossed. You always want to replace the clutch bolts as well as the flywheel bolts whenever you do this work. Okay, once all the bolts are removed, there's this plate here that comes off. And then once again, OT, we know it goes back together the same way. And this very easily just comes out like that. Not much usually goes wrong with these parts. It's make sure the teeth are good for from the starter. If the starter was bad, it'll tear the teeth up. There's a little bit of wear on these teeth, but not so bad. If necessary, there is this is available as a replacement part. Okay, doesn't look like too long since somebody's been here, but we're still going to go through and change the seal. So this center piece here needs to be pulled out first. There is a special tool for that. And here's the way it looks. This is the special tool from BMW. It's basically, you're able to slip that right over the end of the crankshaft cap. Here is what that really is. And then using either a Kuko puller or a slide hammer, you can pop that off. Now, chances are you don't have one of those. If you do, that's cool, but if not, there's got to be another way. There are some other tools, I think, that people make to take that off, but you can actually do it with a couple of screwdrivers. I'm just going to get in here with both screwdrivers and very carefully just rock it back and forth. So it's pretty much loose now, and it should come right out. So I've done it this way when I've been in places where I didn't have special tools, and it's always worked. Now, there's an O-ring in there that you're going to want to replace. Checking this looks good. This is what rides against that thrust bearing. Now, it's not this one that we're concerned about falling into the abyss, but rather its counterpart on the inside. This one, if this one fell off of the two pins, it'd be no big deal. You'd be able to just stick it right back on there. But if the inboard one falls off, that's where the problem will arise, and that's why our strap is a very important part of this procedure. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and remove that main seal. Okay, to remove the seal, it's helpful to have something like this, which is a seal puller. This is actually a pretty cool one that we offer that has sort of an adjustable head so you can get all kinds of different positions. It's also very good when you're working in a confined space like this. You need to go in and grab a hold of that seal by pushing that in. Now, you don't want to press or pry against the crankshaft because that could dislodge it, possibly. It's just not a good idea to do that. You need something else to pry against. So I use this is a piece of aluminum, little 1/2-inch bar that I can just lay in here across. Anything would work, a piece of wood, really anything you might have laying around. But so now see, I've got a nice little bite on that seal. I'm not prying against the crankshaft, and I've got this tool that allows me to work in this area, in this small area, and now I should be able to just pull that seal. So there you have it. See, it's coming right out now. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to take a few minutes to clean up all this grime in here, and then we'll change out the oil pump O-ring as well, then go back and put everything back together again. So I'm going to go grab a pan and a brush and start cleaning. All right, so I got things pretty well cleaned up, and at least most of the big chunks are gone, and we'll go ahead and change out the oil pump O-ring right now. Okay, so there's the cover off of there. Definitely it's got some scoring on there. There's no doubt about that. Take the O-ring out. So I think I'm gonna have a look at these gears too. So it's possible to take something like this, that's a very sharp little 90-degree thing, and sort of wedge that behind, and you can then pull out the pump outer ring. Quite a lot of scoring on here too. I think we're looking at a new oil pump on this bike. Yeah. See how this is looking. So luckily the motor block seems to be good. I don't feel any scoring in there. So that's oftentimes what happens here, is that those parts have maybe sucked in some crud there. I don't know. It's motors with a lot of miles on it. I think that I'm going to go and grab some new parts. Just look at these one more time here. So you can really see scoring on the outside, and you can really see it on the inside, and I can feel it. Just running my fingernail over it, you can feel it's just really not optimal. Worst thing about something like that is once the wear starts, then it continues and it accelerates. And also, you wouldn't want to put any new parts, in my opinion, together with old parts. So if you're going to do it, I think it's a good idea to change out all of the parts. Now the inner pump rotor too, very noticeable wear on the corners. It's very rough. And it's pretty well shot. And finally here again, the first piece we looked at, a lot of deep scoring in there. And yeah, I hope we have all this stuff in stock. I think we do. Okay, luckily we had all those parts in stock, so we can keep moving here. So there's two types of oil pump gears on the inner one, on the end of the camshaft. This is the later style, which is a very late model bike, relatively speaking, with the two flats on the side. The earlier ones had a Woodruff key. If you update your camshaft, always, this is a much better design. The Woodruff key driven pumps would occasionally, they would occasionally fail. So shear the key off. So anyway, this is the new style here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this area out, blow it out to get all of that any debris out of there, and also the holes for the bolts. Pretty clean. Okay, so now we can go ahead and put the pump in. Now this center gear is sort of flat on one end and has like a chamfer on the other end. And the chamfer should go in first. So that's the way we'll do that. So we're gonna put some oil on this part and go ahead and slide it on. The really early ones had little dots on them that you had to face to each other, but the replacements don't have that anymore. I don't know that it really matters that much because it's got 4 lobes on it, where this has 5 lobes on it, so it's always going to be going into a different hole as it spins. So they left that out. They also now have this little recess in there. I guess it's like an oil scraper, which is probably not a bad idea. And this one does not appear to be directional at all. So we'll just lube it up real nice. And throw some oil in there too. Can only hardly have too much of that. There we go. Okay, now there are some measurements that you can take on this oil pump. I'm going to go ahead and take a couple measurements because I just want to make sure that these trashed oil pump parts didn't, open things up too much or cause wear. It didn't seem like it, but what the heck. So you need to have a feeler gauge. These that we carry are really neat because they're super narrow and tapered, and also come in a nice range of sizes. So one of the measurements that we're going to take is the clearance around the outer edge of the rotor, and the specification on that one is 0.1 to 0.17 millimeter. So these gauges come in pretty cool because we've got 10, 13, 15, 18, and so really, I mean, a 10 is definitely going to fit in there. I can see that with my eye. And that fits in there too. Now, the thing to do is just go to the max. 0.17 is the upper end of the specification. We've got a 0.18 here. So you just kind of poke around in there, and it actually doesn't go in anywhere. It kind of wants to go in there, but it's tight. So that's cool. So we'll take the one smaller than that. .15, well within spec. Yeah, that one just goes in nice and snug. So that's good. We don't have any excessive wear. Yeah, that's beautiful. It fits really nicely in there, that 0.15. The 0.8 doesn't, so great within spec there. The other one is to look at is the distance here between this part of the rotor, and that one is, we're looking at 0.12. So I've got to put the 0.15 here again and just fitting that in. We want a 0.12 to 0.3. 0.3 is on the outside, so the 0.15 goes in smoothly. Let's try the 0.25, which is the biggest one on this gauge set. That goes in, but it goes in really tight. And the 0.25 spec is 0.3, close enough. I think we're in spec on that. Okay, the last measurement that I would like to do is the end gap, basically the clearance between the cover and the rotors. Now the spec on that one is really small, 0.026 to 0.059, or say 0.06. So if I take my 0.03, it's like not much to that one. It's very, very thin. And then I've got a little machinist straight edge here, which I'll lay right across the face and hold it on like so. And now come in here, and the 3 does fit in there in a couple spots. Down a little tight there. But basically, it's going to be within spec, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to go up one notch to my 0.05. And just make sure it shouldn't go in anywhere if everything's okay. It just bounces off. It's like, if I cock it a little bit, I'd rather keep it straight on there, just give it a little bit of an angle so the gauge actually will fit in there, because that way you know that it's so thin, this thing. So if you have it straight on there, it's going to go just butt up against it. You don't even know if it's in the gauge. I can't see that well anyway. So just move it at about 5 degrees, 10 degrees, so that there's a little bit of an angle. Then the gauge fits in, so you know you're in the right place, but it won't go through. And then, because you're basically putting that straight edge up on edge on the flat surface. And it won't go through, so dynamite. I think we got a healthy heart for this motorcycle now that we've replaced that pump. So let's go ahead and finish assembling it. So before I put the pump on, I'm just going to take this oiler. This is a really cool oiler, by the way, because what's really neat about it is it will actually squirt even inverted. It has a very unique pickup that's hinged, gravity hinged. And so it's pretty cool because you can actually get in and do something like this, like horizontally, get some oil in there, and it won't be sucking air. It's a pretty cool little tool to have. So I just gave it another little squirt, and I'll wipe off the excess here. And then I've got my new cover plate and put the O-ring in the groove. And this is directional. It only goes one way. If you look carefully at it, it has a bevel edge. It has like a chamfer on one side, and that side has to go up. So it's going to be oriented like this. So before we get into that, though, always want to replace the bolts. I always recommend that you replace these bolts along with anything else. And even if you just change the O-ring and you put it back together again, you should put new bolts in there. And I also put just a little bit of Loctite on there. Use just the medium strength blue is really sufficient, but this is one thing you don't want coming apart. All right, just double check that O-ring, make sure it's in the groove. Looks good. And then torque to spec. I like to just snug them all down first in a cross pattern before torquing any one of them. All right. Okay, we're going to put in the new rear main seal now. And it's applied like this. And this is an installation sleeve, which is applicable on certain things that this might be used on, but it doesn't really apply to our situation here. We don't need this sleeve, but it does have the advantage of it sort of pre-shaped the seal lip, and so it should be pretty much ready to install. Now, people have asked me, do you put this seal in dry or do you oil it? Well, I put it in dry, and the reason for that is because it says to do here in the instructions. That's the reason. And so, yeah, inside this box comes this little card, and it's pretty funny, actually. So first of all, you see here, it says only people wearing overalls and carrying a wrench should be working on the motorcycle. So it looks like it would apply to me at least. So the little guy with the overalls there, I think that's pretty cool. But on the other side, more importantly, it says really clean it, no junk on there, absolutely clean. And then it says here, no oil, dry, with an exclamation point. Wipe it with a rag, clean. That's what they're saying. And then this is the way it's installed that shows that. And then it says that you should wait 4 hours before you start the motor after installing the seal. So they probably know what they're talking about, so I'm going to go with that. Okay, so clean means clean. And then now then I could just go ahead and take this sleeve off of there. And then set the seal in there like that. This is the factory installation tool. The thing weighs a ton, and it works like this. This screw goes in this bridge. This little piece goes on like so, like that, and then this is the seal installer. Fits in there like that, and then you bolt this whole thing up to the engine surface here. I can't remember which bolts it is. I think it's the ones that work. And then you screw this down and it pushes the seal and does a nice job. But pretty elaborate. What also works is a disc like this. I made this one I made myself on a lathe, but we're actually having these produced, and they might be available by the time you see this video, or they will be very soon. It'll be really identical, more or less, to this. That was the prototype. And to use this, you take the bolts that came out the clutch carrier and use them to install the seal. And we still have our strap on there, so we are probably not going to have any problem with the thrust washers or anything like that. So just going to lay that on top of there and screw in these bolts. You can put in, sometimes people put in 3, or you can put in all 5. We made 5 holes, and we the tool that we're making for sale is also with 5 holes. So I'll just put 5. I can try putting 5 bolts in there, and just turn each bolt a little bit at a time and draw the seal in to its position. Okay, so I've got all the bolts just snugged down, and then it's going to be a matter of just giving each one a little twist. Just going to go round and round. As the seal gets drawn in all the way, you'll start to feel some resistance when you're tightening the bolts. There is a solid stop in there. The seal gets pushed against. So once you feel that resistance, you're pretty much done. Just want to sort of go around and just slightly snug everything to make sure you have it seated right, but you certainly don't want to tighten this much at all. You just to where there's slight pressure is stopping it from turning. And now that seal is in all the way, I'm pretty confident. So I'm just going to back these bolts out and remove them. There we go. That's that. All right, so now this cover goes back on again, this cap here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the old O-ring. And clean that up. Okay, that looks good. And then put a new O-ring in. Just going to lightly lubricate the O-ring. And the bearing surface. All right, that's ready to go back on. Just have to line up the holes. We press that in here. Now, then you can take a bolt, and by the way, we're putting new bolts in. Always want to do that and see how those line up. Now, see, I'm off. Man, just a tiny bit. It's hard to get it exactly right. Okay, that did the trick. Just make sure that the bolts all go in. If it's just off just a tiny bit, you might have a little rough time getting the bolts lined up. So we're all good there. Now we can take the clutch carrier, got my OT mark here, line that up in the window. Right, And then we have that little shim that came off, and we're using brand new bolts. Okay, so I've just run all the bolts in by hand, just to where they are bottomed out. Before tightening any more, just in case, despite all the precautions that I took with my strap and everything, if that washer came off, then the motor is going to be locked at this point in time. So just make sure that you can turn it easily. And if that's the case, then you're ready to torque. Okay, now we got our tool back installed. It's going in a sort of a cross pattern. Bring all the bolts down to snug before tightening any one of them. And different models have different torque specs, so make sure that you consult the manual of the bike that pertains to the bike you're working on. All right, that takes care of that. Take this tool off. All right, so we got the clutch carrier all bolted in, torqued down. Put this part back on so we get rid of that crankshaft float issue. Don't need the strap anymore. I can take that off. That's all sorted. So now that we have that all buttoned up, the new oil pump, the new rear main seal, and the clutch carrier reinstalled, we'll go ahead and proceed to finish this part of it up and put the clutch in. So I've got the clutch parts all here. It's all original socks, original manufacturer to BMW. Here's the disc. Diaphragm spring, the cover plate, and the pressure plate here. Everything ready to go. Plus I've got the new bolts here. The other thing that you may want to consider seriously if you're doing a clutch job, and by the way, these clutch components are the same for all bikes from 1981 on, basically all two valves. And if you're going to replace the clutch on your bike, it's highly recommended that you also pick up a clutch centering tool. I can show you really pretty graphically how this works. This will fit on, the clutch fits on the tool, and then the shaft of the tool fits into the end of the crankshaft like that. And so what will happen is that will ensure that the clutch disc is perfectly centered on there. And this is really important when you go to put the gearbox back in, because the input shaft has to line up with that clutch disc as well as the various mounting points. So if it's off even by a couple of millimeters, it can be very difficult to get the gearbox installed. So this is a pretty good tool to have. Just because these parts are new, they still need to be cleaned. Don't make the mistake of just putting them on. A lot of times there's a little bit of, you can see like a cosmoline or some sort of preservative on the faces so that it won't rust. So you want to make sure that you clean these parts really thoroughly before you install them. Using, for example, some brake parts cleaner. We can sort of pre-assemble the clutch. This is going to be sliding on here as you engage and disengage the clutch. So a little bit of lubricant here on these points is not a bad idea. For this, you can use the Liquimoly LM47. That works quite well. But what we're using now is the SOX grease. It seems to work extremely well for the splines. and it has a very nice property of clinging, and so we're using it on the splines and also on the other clutch components. So not much is needed, but a little smear is not a bad idea. Okay. Now this is the white paint marks I was talking about earlier when we took it apart. There's that white paint mark there, and there's a white paint mark here. Okay, so earlier when we took it apart, I referenced this as the white mark. I thought that was actually the white mark on there, but I misspoke. It's actually down here. We want to have this white mark somewhat opposite to that. Like up here would be ideal. So we'll put that there. And then put the disc into play here like so. And this mark down here. And so that way we should be pretty balanced. Great, so we can hold the whole thing together like that, then put this tool in to center everything. So now we've got paint mark here on these two components, and paint mark down here. So we'll put it together like this. Put the tool into the crankshaft, and then try to line everything up. All right, just got 3 bolts started, one on each of the 3 ears, and I'm just going to sort of pull everything together here, slowly but surely. Make sure that the tool is still nice and centered, it spins freely. There we go. There's 3 of them tight. Now put the other 3 in. Make sure you always replace these clutch bolts as well as the serrated washer. Once these washers get smashed down, they're not really useful anymore, so that you just want to replace both of these components. Okay, those are all torqued to spec, and clutch is complete. Now we're just going to put a little bit of this spline lube grease inside these splines here. All the splines need to be filled with grease, and we'll also put a little bit on the input shaft too. Here we go, that should do it. All right, so the clutch is buttoned up, completely installed, ready for the gearbox to be reinstalled. And before we do that though, we're gonna go on to do other components, but that'll be another time. This is all we can do today. And when you subscribe to our YouTube channel, then you'll be informed when the next episode comes out, and there's gonna be a bunch more. So make sure that you do subscribe, and make sure that you are subscribed to our newsletter as well, so you get up-to-date information about videos and other things that are going on here at Boxer 2 Elf. You'll find links to the various parts, both in the video as well as on our website. And if you have any questions, please do contact us. Make comments on the YouTube channel. We'll try to answer those as quickly as we possibly can. And in the meantime, until next time, this is William from Boxer 2 Valve, and we'll see you on the flip side.